What is going on, sports card fiends? Hopefully you guys are having a wonderful day, and today we're here with a video on the USMNT versus the rest of the world in terms of soccer card collecting, and sort of my rationale as to why I do like it and also why I don't like it, because there are, of course, both sides of the coin, and I not only collect USMNT, of course, I'm very heavily involved with also the rest of the world and actual, legendary players, not just all USMNT prospects, as I would hope you guys are as well. But today I wanted to go through the pros and cons of each and kind of compare them. So we'll start with the USMNT and go through their pros and cons. For the first thing, in terms of pros, you have avid prospecting. There are going to be people that care about these guys, and as we get towards 2022 and 2026, there's going to be ample demand for these players that are actually good on our team, so you have good potential in that regard. Beyond that, it's sort of a golden generation for the USMNT, so you do have that working in your favor as well. This is essentially the best we've ever been in terms of talent, and they're still all really young. In addition to that, it's cheap relative. So for soccer in the USMNT sphere, if you compare it to anything like baseball, basketball, NFL, it seems incredibly cheap. So anyone that was looking to maybe buy some things and they're involved in other sports, they're not going to really second guess it because it just seems like pennies on the dollar. And so it's very easy to get into in that regard. You also have a small pool in terms of player base. There aren't a ton of USMNT players, so you're not going to be having to battle too much in terms of the spotlight. In addition to that, World Cup 2022 and 2026, as I mentioned before, are huge potential eyeballs for the USMNT. Obviously 2022 is good next year, but it's not that great in the sense that it is during the winter, it is in Qatar, so it's going to be weird timing, and so I don't think it's going to be as big as people would probably hope. But then with 2026, it's going to be hosted in the US, so that's just a guarantee in my mind, and the potential demand is there. As I mentioned before, people like the USMNT, and honestly it's very easy to get into because the entire premise is like, whenever you watch a sport, who should I root for, and it's very easy to understand who you should root for if the entire United States is in a tournament. That's why people love the Olympics here. It's honestly why the women's national team gets so much recognition, because they're actually good. On the con side of it, though, it is a new segment in terms of cards, so there isn't a stable backbone yet, so you don't have that solid foundation that you might like. In addition to that, maybe we missed the World Cup. That's a potential possibility going into this next one. 2026, we're guaranteed in because we host it. But beside that, the U.S. women's national team is actually more popular than the U.S. men's national team. I don't know if that's necessarily true in the card perspective, but generally speaking, that is the case. And then beyond that, it just has a low floor. These things could be very easily worthless. If a player kind of falls out of the USMNT, there's not a ton of diehard collectors for particular players at the moment. Now, comparing that to the rest of the world, for the pros of worldwide soccer collecting, one, of course, it is just worldwide, so the potential demand is massive. They have proven legends, players that people will actually care about regardless of what happens the next 10, 20, 40 years. Beyond that, you have diversity in terms of people collecting and also the collectibles at hand. There's also the idea that football is basically a culture or a religion for a lot of these individual clubs, so there's just so much passion behind it. While with the USMNT, there is some passion, but again, it's just not the same level at all. And that also leads to true collecting. There are people that truly want to be there and truly want to partake, and they also don't necessarily only care about the good guys. They like collecting cents, and they like, collecting sort of the smaller odds and ends, which is more beautiful in my opinion. On the downside, it is a large pool, so there's a lot going on. It's a lot to learn, and especially for the younger guys, it's very, very easy to just kind of be kicked to the curb. In addition to that, they have many leagues and many releases, so again, hard to learn, hard to really figure out, and there's a lot of questions that people have, so it's not as straightforward as card collecting or investing in other realms. And beyond that, there's also a lack of proven demand. That's definitely changing over time, and we've seen that the last couple of years. But again, soccer is a sphere where up until the last few years, there really wasn't much of a market at all. So the backbone isn't necessarily intact and a very fortified backbone. It's something that's sort of building, and you can be a part of that. So now that we have the pros and cons generally out of the way, I'm going to go ahead and compare the USMNT to two different segments of soccer cards. The first is going to be the vintage / pre-modern, so basically proven players. and the second is going to be the ultra-modern, more so the unproven players. So as far as potential demand, I believe that all three categories actually have that. However, vintage / pre-modern legends of the sport have much more potential demand than any of the current players for the USMNT or for the prospecting world for Europeans at large. In terms of player pool risk, here, I think that the USMNT doesn't have too much of a risk. I think that vintage and pre-modern doesn't have much risk either, because that's already pretty much ingrained, but ultra-modern for the rest of the world does have a lot of risk. With the USMNT, it's a pretty small pool, so you know what you're getting into. With the worldwide youth of soccer, that's a large pool, so trying to predict that and get it right is very difficult and very risky. The ease of entry for the USMNT is very easy. It's very obvious in terms of what sets and what players, while the ease of entry for these other segments are very difficult. Again, that's kind of the tough spot with soccer, is that it's hard to enter. You need to learn a lot, and you have to be willing to really dig into it. And that's why we saw the Prism boom last year, is because a lot of people got into soccer and really didn't even know what to buy, so everyone just decided Prism is it. And that certainly isn't the case. You have to do your research, but that's a good thing, because if you truly want to be there, you have to have that barrier of entry, so you know who the real people are in the market. But at the same time, as far as new people getting into it, it's a lot harder for those other segments. As far as growth of the sport, the USMNT has that going for it, while these other segments do not. Now, the thing is here, I'll go on to the next one already because it's what I want to talk about. The growth of collectors is also important. So with the USMNT, we do have that as well, but with vintage and pre-modern and these proven segments in worldwide soccer, the growth of collectors is, the potential is absurd. So of course you do have that working for you. However, the sport cannot grow. So the US market for cards is very high, obviously. That's kind of where a lot of this has all spawned from. So with that, if soccer does grow here, we'll get those collectors on our side. But in terms of global soccer, there are tons of dormant collectors that are just waiting to learn the sport. And beyond that, in terms of diversity, the USMNT, there's really not too much going on. It's pretty set in stone in terms of sets and sort of what there is to learn. While with these other segments, there is a good bit to learn. So I think diversity is a good thing. I think having a lot of different products and a lot of different avenues of collecting is great. Depending on how you view that, you might not, but I think it keeps it fresh, keeps the people motivated and learning more, which is always good. In terms of the highest ceilings, I think that the USMNT has a massive ceiling. In addition to that, I think vintage and pre-modern has a massive ceiling, while ultra-modern global stars, I don't know if they have as massive of a ceiling. Of course, if they're a proven star over time, they could have that massive ceiling. However, there's only a couple players that are really going to have that. So I think at large, the ultramodern scene for global soccer collecting isn't really a place I'd want to be, because it's too easy to fall by the wayside. While with USMNT, it's very easy to see who the good players are. And beyond that, with vintage and pre-modern soccer, it's very easy to know who the good players were then. In terms of having a high floor, I would say the only thing that really does is vintage and pre-modern, these proven players. Beyond that, the floor for ultra-modern is, wherever. No one really knows. So I guess we kind of test that as the time comes. But yeah, USMNT and ultra-modern prospects in general, their floor is incredibly low. So of course, there's a lot of risk in that regard. And, with risk comes reward. So in terms of prospecting, the USMNT does have a good bit of prospecting. However, I would say ultra-modern worldwide soccer prospecting is definitely, very, very interesting in the sense that there are so many different players that you could always find a few that are just kind of falling through the cracks and could make that next potential bump. With the USMNT, it's hard to find the guy that no one's heard of that has some good releases that then it sort of hits the scene, because everyone knows about everyone. But in terms of global soccer, obviously you can't scout everyone, you can't watch everyone, so there are entry points on a lot of different prospects. So tallying all the scores together, the USMNT got an 8, while the pre-modern and vintage market got an 11, and the ultra-modern market got a 6. So ultimately, what I'm saying here is I believe in the USMNT market more than I believe in sort of the prospecting market of the European stars of now. Main reason being because there's not the proven demand for the European stars of now. There is proven demand for USMNT stars of the future. And in addition to that, I just don't think Europeans are as inclined to go prospecting in soccer cards as they would be to go back and buy up the legends of their youth. And with the USMNT, there are no legends of our youth. You know, there are some, you know, maybe like Elena Donovan and Clint Dempsey, depending on your era, there could be others. But there's really not that proven history. So a lot of people want the youth in the USMNT, and there is that market. While for the prospecting side of the European game, I don't really think that exists, but the true collecting and the true greats are going to have an amazing market, and I truly do believe in those more than I believe in the USMNT long term. I still think there's a lot of opportunities in all of these markets, but this was just me comparing the USMNT to a couple different ones to see kind of what I'm thinking and what you guys are as well. So hopefully you guys enjoyed this comparison. It was one that I had a good bit of fun with, and it's always interesting to kind of talk out why I believe or don't believe in certain segments of markets. At the end of the day, I think soccer is a great market in general, so I don't think you're doing too much wrong, but just want to get my thoughts out there and see what you guys think as well. So hopefully you guys enjoyed. If you did, make sure to leave a like. On top of that, would love to hear what you think down below in a comment, and if you want some more videos like this as soon as I go live, make sure to subscribe. But with that said, hopefully you have a wonderful day, and peace.